Okay, so welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. Wonderful to see you all. So I would like to just briefly introduce Cynthia. Cynthia Bampton is the co-founder of the Awaken Life Project with her husband Peter Bampton, which is based here in Portugal. Cynthia is my teacher and teacher to many others. And I really encourage you to take this opportunity to interact with her during the question and answer, because it's just an amazing opportunity to have your questions about any aspect of what she's speaking about, or indeed any questions you might have about the Awaken Life Project. But yes, don't hold back. And with that, I will hand over to Cynthia.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. I was kind of curious on how many people would come on a webinar that says it's a webinar about death. So I didn't know if anybody would show up or if a lot of people would show up. So it's very nice to see you. Let's just take a few minutes to just sit quietly together. So if you can just sit up straight and just take a moment to just relax. Closing your eyes. And take a deep breath in. And exhale slowly. And again, inhale, bringing the air, fully expanding the body. And as you exhale, release any tension you might be carrying. Just do this a couple more times on your own, breathing very deeply and feeling the breath coming into the body. And when you're exhaling, just release any tension you might be feeling. It doesn't matter if the mind is busy. It doesn't matter if you have pain in the body. Just allow yourself to rest. Appreciate the fact that the body is being breathed. And recognize that you are that which is aware of any sensation, any pain. You are aware of the body sitting. You are aware of the body breathing. If you are aware of the movement of mind and the sensation of the body, then you can recognize first and foremost, you are that which is aware. That which is prior to any sensation of the body and any movement of the mind. And simultaneously, you as consciousness is the body breathing, is the movement of mind. So just be aware. Doesn't matter what the content that's arising in your awareness, just coming and going. But you are that constant awareness. You are that doesn't move and doesn't change. You are that is never born and never dies. The body is constantly changing. The content of the mind is constantly changing. But you are not. You are that which is observing. So relax into that. Relax into awareness as yourself. And don't be disturbed by thought, by emotions, by anything. You don't have to push away thoughts. You don't have to try to control any aspect of your experience. If thought is arising, it's arising. But you are that which is observing. You are the vast, limitless awareness that everything you're aware of is arising from. So you're not trying to create anything. You're not trying to quiet the mind. You're not trying to have any bright light experience. You simply rest as consciousness itself, that which is prior to the movement of the content that's arising. It's very, very simple. It's always the case. You are always this consciousness, this awareness that's prior to the ever-changing experience that the body-mind might be having. You don't have to try to convince yourself of this. You don't have to believe me. Just ask yourself, are you aware of my voice? Are you aware of thought arising in your experience? Are you aware of any sensations occurring in the body? So if you are aware that you are aware, and you are aware as you're observing that you do not move, you do not fluctuate, you do not change, it's like the screen never moves, but the content of the movie is constantly moving. So this is in your own experience. Immediately, that who you are, first and foremost and always, is the eternal, ever-present, awareness. Just look for yourself. If your mind is very busy and you are aware of it, you don't need to do anything because you're already aware that you are aware. So as you relax, see if you can get in touch with this awareness that isn't moving, that isn't changing. It has no birth and it has no death. It has no beginning. It has no ending. It just is. So take a deep breath in. And again, exhale as you relax the body and you enliven the body. And another deep breath in and allow yourself to feel it. And exhale and release. And one more time. Deep breath in. And as you exhale, open your eyes. Okay. So I hope everybody got a little bit of a taste of the awareness that is prior to the movement of all content. And this is a very important thing to understand and to recognize, because we're so habitually identified with the movement of mind, the sensation of the body. We think we are what we think, and we think we are what we feel. So really think about that for a second, because when we start talking about death, it's very important to understand, who are you? Who are you? Are you the movement of mind? Are you the sensation of the body? Are you the body? Or are you that which is prior to all of that? And are you that which actually animates the body? So this is a really, really important question, especially when we're talking about death. So there's different ways we can go about talking about this, you know. My goal is not to make you feel better around death. You might end this webinar and you might feel better, but it's really for you to start getting real with this question and this inevitable event that is going to happen to each one of us. And that's just the way it is. So this is the difficult thing. So first of all, death is inevitable. And in Western society, we spend a lot of time trying to deny that that's the case. We spend usually our whole lives trying to avoid that, even though we know that it's true. We know that everyone is dying. We know that everything in this manifest world is constantly in a state of change. It's in a state of degeneration, and it's in a state of death eventually. So we know that, but we don't like it. So we just avoid it. And not only don't we like it, we're terrified of it. It all seems very final. It's like when the body is gone, I'm gone. When the person I love's body is gone, they're gone. That's how we relate to it. So that's why we want to go first. We want to lay some groundwork here. It's so important you decide. Well, you don't decide, you have to recognize, you have to realize, who am I? Because if you're very attached, that you think that you are the body, the idea of the death of the body or the falling away of the body is absolutely terrifying. There's no way out. If you think you're the body, you're going to live in a state of terror, and you're either going to acknowledge that or you're going to try to deny it. But there's going to be a constant state of stress. So that's why it's so important. There is a way out from that intensity of living in a constant state of fear and stress that when this body dies, I'm dead. So the physical death is inevitable. I think we can all agree upon that, right? Okay. So there's something called ego death. And the definition that I use for ego is the presumption that you are separate, isolated, alone, and limited. It's a separate sense of self, meaning I am separate from you. So, in the spiritual truth of actually the true reality, when you start to recognize that you are that which is prior to anything that's happening in this world, this manifest universe, when you recognize, oh my God, I'm actually not just this craziness that I call myself. I actually do have some space, and I recognize that I am actually that which is aware of who I thought I was. Okay, so that's the first step. You just have that little bit of space before you think this is me, and there's no space. And then all of a sudden you start to recognize, oh, I am that which is aware. I am not just my history. I am not just the body. I am not just the pain and the suffering that I experience, or the joy and the happiness. I am not just that. So this is an important piece of the puzzle. So when you recognize that I am prior to that, I am that which is never changing. I am that which is always present. I am that which has no birth, that has no death. And you recognize your primary sense of who you are. You recognize that to be who you are. And then you recognize that this is a body mind that is being animated by that one consciousness that I am. It happens to have a name, that's Cynthia in this case, and this body mind has history. It has, I was born at a certain time. I have a certain life experience. You all were born at a certain time. The body minds were born at a certain time. You all have different life experience, but we're all that one consciousness. And your body mind has just done different things than my body mind, but the one consciousness has been animating all of these body minds. And that one consciousness is never going to die, and it's never been born. The bodies have been born, and the bodies will die. Everybody with me so far? So it's not that you're going to change anything. What you're going to do, the only way out of this intense fear of death, is the recognition of what actually already is. And the recognition and the acceptance of what it is to be in a human body mind that is actually has a beginning, has an ending, will die, is going to suffer. Okay? So the whole spiritual path, the problem is most of the time we're so attached to the body and we're so afraid that we're going to die when the body dies. What we end up doing is we actually end up killing spirit. So you can have physical death, but many people have spiritual death. So you really have a choice. If you want to identify with the separate sense of self as being who you are, if you want to identify with this body as being who you are, you will have a different relationship to life, and you will have a very different relationship to the death of this body. But if you recognize you are prior to that, and you're willing to do the spiritual work, to transcend the presumption that you are this separate self that has history, that is in this body, who's restricted to the inside of this body. If you do the work to be able to transcend that, to understand that the whole idea of a separate self, the whole idea of you being separate and you being something different than consciousness, spirit, or God, that belief and that illusion has to be seen through. And then you will recognize yourself as that which is eternal. And you will not deny that there is a body mind here named Cynthia. But the thing is that you'll recognize that this body mind, this named Cynthia, is actually a manifestation or a modification of that one consciousness. So this modification that lives in time and space will die. But consciousness itself will not. But as consciousness itself, you are that. But many times, and the work really comes in, is many times we're so habitually presuming that we're the separate self, that even when we wake up to the spiritual truth that I am that which is prior to, I am consciousness, I am the consciousness that's animating this body mind, it's still this presumption of a separate self named Cynthia can be so strong that you can recognize all that and you can still be attached to the idea that you're separate. And that's what the awakening process is. It's waking up to that which is prior to, that which never dies, as yourself, and that which animates everything in this world, whether it be a tree, a frog, the wind, or your body. Anything that's in this world is all a modification of that one consciousness. Everything in this world is in a state of degeneration and dying. But that which animates everything never dies. So this is not something that you can just get with your mind. It's something that you have to surrender to. It's something that you need to find out for yourself. Because you can't just talk yourself into it to try to escape the fear of death. It's not going to work. I think maybe some of you have tried that before. You know, you're trying to convince yourself, I am consciousness, I am consciousness, I am consciousness, I never die, I never die. Why in the hell am I still terrified of death? Okay, I'm consciousness, I am consciousness, it never dies, I'm fine, everything's good, I'm gonna, I'm still gonna continue after the body drops. See, you still think, you're still presuming you're a separate self. Okay, I get the whole thing that I'm not my body. I get when my body drops that I'm still here. But you see, if you haven't done the work, you haven't sacrificed a separate sense of self. You haven't surrendered to that truth fully. That's where the conflict comes in. You see, so you're going to think that you, as the separate self, is going to continue after the body drops. It's very easy to think that. So it's really this presumption of the separate self that causes you all your fear, and especially the fear of death. Especially the fear of death. So it's really good that we start talking about this fear of death. Because first of all, it's so taboo. It's like people don't like to talk about it. Have you ever had the experience that you just have this overwhelming fear of dissolution? Like you're just going to disappear? I had this pretty much from when I was about, 10 until probably I was 30. And I would just all of a sudden get completely terrified that I didn't exist. What was going to happen? What happened when I died? I wouldn't exist. And that whole idea of not existing was absolutely terrifying. And I would, if I was driving, I'd open the windows of my car, stick my head out the window, turn on the radio, just try to slap myself in the face, whatever I could do to just get away from it. So I don't think I'm the only one that's had that experience before. And it doesn't work. You can distract yourself from reality. You can distract yourself from the truth that the body is dying. But you see what you're doing at the same time. When you distract yourself from the truth of death, you are distracting yourself from the truth of who you are that is prior to death. And to me, the sadness is not the death of the body. The sadness is the death of spirit, death of the possibility of spirit coming through this body mind, because there's such a strong contraction to say, I do not want to see. I do not want to face the fear of the death of this body mind. So some of you know I've been on retreat for quite a while, over these last 2 months. And over the first couple of weeks, a lot of what I had to really face straight on was this fear of death. But I had a context, so it was intense to face this fear of annihilation, but I also had an understanding that what was dying was the attachment to the separate sense of self. What was dying was my attachment to the presumption that I exist as a separate individual. And I'll tell you, the only thing that you can do to really face this fear of annihilation is to really give your attention to the heart attraction to that which is prior to all of this, to give your attention to whatever it is that lights your heart up, whether it be God, whether it be a teacher you have, whether it be love, but it's something that's prior to a feeling. It's not a feeling, it's not an experience. It's that which is prior to, it's that which is you, it's consciousness itself. And that's really the only way that you can face this process of purifying the belief that you are the separate self. You will not be able to do it from the position of the belief of the separate self. You won't be able to do it. It's too much. Because you're actually facing from the separate self that doesn't actually really exist. You're trying to face the truth of the death of yourself, and you can't do it. You have to be that which is prior to, that which is eternal. You have to recognize that as yourself. And then it's still not easy. But if you look at your own experience, it's very interesting sometimes, because when someone has, a life-threatening situation, whether it be their health or they're in a plane crash, the plane is going down, they're in a fire, something is happening where they have to accept the inevitability of their own death. And they also accept, at this point, when you're really in something like that, in a life-threatening situation, you also have to accept that you are not in control and there's nothing you can do. You have no option other than to accept what's happening. And when you have no other option, the beautiful thing is, when you have no other option and you can't go with the fear of death, you just accept the fear of death, then you get in touch with that which is always already the case. Because you've taken your option away. The mind will always go with a different option, but you have to actually understand that you, through your own choice or through a situation, you always can decide, who am I? Who am I really? There's a spiritual teacher called Barry Long, and he wrote a book, and it's called Only Fear Dies. And to be honest, I can't even remember what the whole book was about. But the title is amazing, because when you think about the death of the separate self, the only thing that dies is the fear of dying. Isn't that true? So if you think about it, the body may die, but really what's dying is your fear. And when your fear dies, that means your attachment to the separate self also dies. Or if you transcend the separate self, then the fear is no longer important. We all have a biological survival mechanism in this body mind. So of course we're wired to have a certain kind of fear. to keep us, physically functioning. But that's not the death I'm talking about. That's not the fear that I'm talking about. So I want you to just think for a moment, when you go to sleep at night, and let's say that you have a dream, and you dream that you're being killed. So the dream, basically, you're being attacked, you're being killed, and then you die. And then you wake up in the morning and you recognize, oh, it's just a dream. So you're not really upset anymore that you died because you recognize it was just a dream, right? But when you were in the dream, you were fighting because you were terrified to die. Everybody understand? So when you wake up to what I'm talking about, it's exactly the same thing. You're in the waking state because your eyes are open, you're not sleeping, but you wake up from the dream or the illusion or the presumption of the separate self. And you realize, oh my God, I am that which is prior to. And you're no longer having the same fearful relationship to the death of the body, because what's missing when you wake up is the presumption of the separate self. So you're not upset anymore. It's the same as the dream. You see what I mean? But we take the waking state really seriously. But it's just a dream. It's just another state of consciousness. When the body is sleeping and there's activity going on in the dream state, it's just content that's arising in your, in your awareness because you're dreaming. But isn't it the same thing when you're awake? Isn't there just content arising in your awareness? In the dream state, you might be identifying with what's happening. You're identifying with the character in the dream. In the waking state, you're also identifying with the character who's in the dream. But for some reason, it's interesting. When we wake up in the morning and we go from the dream state to the waking state, we don't think the dream is real, but we're completely convinced that this waking state dream is real. Isn't that what we do? So maybe just take a moment and go, yeah, that's really interesting. And if you look, and if you've had, if you can look over the last year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, if you recognize in yourself that you have a deeper understanding of who you are now, you have more recognition that I'm not my mind, I'm not the thoughts that are going through my head, I'm not the emotions, I'm not the contraction that I feel. If you recognize you have more understanding about that than you did 1 year, 5 years, 10 years ago, you see, you're already waking up from this waking dream. You're already waking up. But what you need to do is you need to actually then, the best thing you can do that will really wake you up and really challenge all the beliefs you have is face your fear of death. Don't avoid it. That's going to challenge that presumption of the separate self more than any other thought or belief that you might have. And it's the one thing that you're avoiding more than any other thought or belief. And it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what your physical state is. Right now, everybody that's hearing what I'm saying is alive, right? No matter what's going on. So as long as you're alive, then why not wake up to what I'm saying? Why not? And the only reason you wouldn't want to is because you don't want to face your fear of death. And I'm talking about the death of the separate sense of self. You're not dying. The body is dying. And you have to look at what we're trained to believe. We're always trained to believe that there's a cycle that's beginning and ending, We always look at birth as a beginning. We always look at death as something that's ending. But is that really true? Isn't birth just an activity that you're aware of? Isn't death just an activity that you're aware of when it's happening? So you're aware of birth and death because you happen to be in that moment. You are consciousness in form. But when you die, when the body dies, the only thing that's happening is you are consciousness with no form. Do you understand? But we always think, oh no, when I die, I'm dead. That's the end of the story. Oh God, I'm gone. And it's really weird because we're so attached to who we are. And at the same time, we don't even like who we are. Right? We don't like who we are, but it's like, oh my God, I don't want to die. I'm so afraid, I'm so contracted. Oh, I don't want to die. But then you wouldn't be on this call if you were completely ecstatic about who you think you are. You would just you'd be doing something else. So the truth is that everybody on the call has some kind of intuition that I am not just this piece of flesh with all these crazy thoughts in my head. Everybody has a recognition that you are something else. You are not that. But you see, you got to be able to just get real with the fact you are completely programmed to think that you are the body and you are the mind. So it does take some effort. And I think all of you, you have probably all had some kind of recognition of this is, that which is prior to, whether you've been meditating and all of a sudden the separate self disappears and you are just consciousness itself, unlimited, no recognition of a separate self. Maybe meditation, maybe walking in nature, whatever you're doing, just in a moment, all of a sudden it's just like the whole attachment just is displaced. And there's a sense of awe and wonder. There's a sense of being alive. There's a sense of deep relaxation, contentment. That is who you are. And that is really where you get in touch with the true happiness that is your natural state. That's where you get in touch with the love that is your natural state. The love and the happiness that is here and now that you deny when you're busy trying to suppress the fear of death. But you know what? When you have that moment where everything disappears, you see the fear of death also disappears. So why is that? Because what's disappearing is the illusion of the separate self. It's the illusion of the separate self. And that illusion is dying. It died. It's gone. And then in the next moment, it's back. And then the fear is back. So you got to look at this and say, wow, when the fear of death disappears, what else disappears? My attachment to being a separate self. So recently, just about a week or so ago, our Sangha, our community here, we had a gathering. And for whatever reason, I think everybody was very ready and primed. Basically, we had 5 days where the separate sense of self disappeared. And everyone was in ecstatic communion with each other. There was no fear. And if any fear arose, it just didn't make any difference. But there was a love explosion. There was a happiness explosion. There was an ecstatic urgency to express the heart. There was love between each other. that has never happened before in the same way. Somebody actually said, I've never told so many people that I don't really know very well how much I love them ever in my life. Okay, now this didn't happen because anybody fixed their problems. This happened because their attention was no longer on the separate self, and there was absolutely no fear of death. There was only life. There was only love. There was only happiness. And it wasn't an experience. It was reality shining through the individuals. The individual body minds allowed themselves, they sacrificed their separate selves. Let's put it this way. The separate self was sacrificed to the fire of the heart, and the love exploded. And this is the way you can live. But you can't do it if you're not going to let go of the fear of death, if you're not going to be willing to look at it. And in a certain way, you see, you can celebrate death. It doesn't have to be celebrating physical death, but you can celebrate the death of the separate self. And then the physical death happens, but you no longer have the same relationship to it. And I'm not making light of this. So it's one of those things that the fear of death disappears in a second. When the presumption of the separate self disappears, the fear of death, boom, gone. Okay? But because of the strong attachment to the separate self, it's a paradox, because you also have to realize that to live that and to really surrender to that takes commitment, takes courage, it takes a willingness to go through this fire of purification. But if you have the ground, if you have enough ground and enough understanding of who you are, like, who am I? I am that which is prior to. I am consciousness. I am love. I am that which is animating everything. And I am this body mind. But I am this body mind as consciousness, not as the separate self. So who you are prior to consciousness, who you are as consciousness, is already whole and complete. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing to get over. There's nothing to transcend. It's immediate. It's here and now. But there's a purification process that needs to take place, because the body mind is polluted with the belief that you're a separate self. So this purification process is a process of purifying the body mind. It's a willingness to just go through a cleanse. It's the willingness to say, I'm going to purify myself from all my wrong ideas, all my beliefs, all my fears. I'm going to sacrifice all of that to the fire of the heart. And I don't mind, because I'm not identified with it. I don't want to hold on to that which is clogging up this physical system. You want to throw it in the fire. So the purification process is happening. You know, every time you take on any of your beliefs, anytime you do any spiritual practice to transcend all these beliefs, anytime you do that, you see you're sacrificing your separate sense of self. That's what you're doing. It's like allowing this vehicle to be cleansed so it can be a shining light of consciousness. Not kind of a half, when you have like a flashlight or a torch and the battery's kind of half dead, right? And it's kind of like the light's not really very satisfying when you're out on a dark path and you've got this light that's not really working very well. So you want to be a full batteried You want to be a full light, not just some kind of, dull light that doesn't shine on anything, doesn't light up anything. Okay, so the thing is like, hopefully what I've said has hit you in some way. And like I said, I didn't really say it to make you feel better, because you still have to face the fear of death. But I want to bring it forward and open it up for questions now, or just for comments, because the more we just talk about it, the more we demystify the presumption, the more we shine light on the fear, the more we recognize that it's the only thing that's going to die is fear. The body will die, but like Barry Long said, only fear really dies. So why not have that fear die now, instead of, waiting until the body drops, and we don't even go into, reincarnation and all of that. But everything that you take care of in this lifetime, I think it's going to be better for you no matter what happens after the body drops. Okay, so everybody with me on all this? Because it's a very, it's nothing to be afraid of. And fear will arise, but it's something to embrace. And don't wait until you're in a situation where you're forced to embrace it. And if you are in a situation where you're being forced to embrace it, then embrace it anyway. Embrace it also. Doesn't really matter what your situation is. The most important thing is you embrace it and you quit denying it. And it's the same for anything. I'm just talking about the fear of death right now. But, as soon as you accept anything and you quit trying to change it or deny it, then liberation occurs. Okay. So we have about a half an hour. So let's make the most of it. Who?
Paul. Charles.
Okay, Charles, you have a question? Oops, you're muted, Paul. You're muted. Paul Charles. Can you unmute him?
Yes.
Laura's going to help you.
Oh, no, I can only ask him to unmute.
Oh, there you go. Oh, I think you did it to each other. So push your button. There you go. Okay.
On
Yeah.
cell phone, so bear
Okay.
over with me. Yeah, I have a question, but first I have some a comment or a sharing I would like to present.
Okay.
I don't know who said it or where I read it, but it is some the quote is life is one long death, and to me that makes meaning. Seeing life as a what was it, the word you use, degeneration? All life long, I mean, we have never been, we never get so healthy. I'm speaking about the bodily death. We never get so healthy as when we are newborn, I believe. And then we grow older and older. I'm now 68 years, and I every day has not every day, but often I feel a kind of a wow, this is new. This symptom is new. My neck and my knees never did that before. I mean, I'm degenerating a lot, but it is like it's not something bad. I feel like in the increasing suffering, in pain, there is a brightness. I feel it like it's even more life, the pain that I feel.
Well, also you can look and see that, I mean, that might come from just acceptance, but you see, you are not getting older. Consciousness doesn't age. The body ages, but you don't.
Yeah.
And so with acceptance, I think of the body aging and degenerating, and your true self is consciousness itself. But through that acceptance, you can get more in touch with the fact that you are not the degenerative body, and you're more in touch with the degeneration of the body.
Yeah.
But you recognize that I am consciousness, and consciousness, I'm, in a certain way, you're ageless.
Exactly. Yeah. You said it there. It's that I don't. The sun doesn't go behind a cloud just because I have more pains in my knee, because the sun is always already the case.
Right. That's the thing.
That was.
So
Yeah.
what was the quote that you said?
There was somebody who said once, I read, life is long. Life is one long death. I mean,
Because when you said it, I mean, I understand. Yeah, when you said it, I actually thought that. So you said life is one long death.
Yeah. Did I lose you?
No, I'm here. I was just thinking of it kind of in the opposite way. That life really is. I understand, but actually, death is one long life.
Yeah.
Because because it's just true, right?
Yeah.
But I understand why the quote is said the way it is, but also if you face death, the death process is actually one long life.
Okay.
Anyway.
And that leads me to the question: if I'm not too quick here, if you want to say something more, please do.
No, go ahead.
My question is, my question is simply, when you say face the fear of death, and that makes me very, very curious. It's like you're giving me the key to the biggest riddle or problem maybe in my life and in life. And my question is, what do I do to face the fear of death?
Well, I think you just get interested in the question, and and then you'll find your way with it. It's not like everybody should go around and try to stimulate some kind of fear of death so that you can face it.
But do you mean right, like a fear of this the last weeks, or fear of what in specific?
Well, I mean, Paul, when you think of it,
my dog is going through a training with Sandra in the Sangha, and it's very concrete hints that she's giving me to, and I see his progress.
I think your spiritual awakening is a little different than training your dog.
I think so too, but it's just like a kind of a concrete. Could you?
No, I can't.
Okay.
Okay. So look, here's the thing. You just got to be interested in this. And the question you're asking me actually sounds a bit strange, because it's kind of like, I can't imagine that you have never actually been afraid of death. So it's got to be in your experience somewhere. It's not like you have to generate it. But when you get interested in fully living, then all sorts of things are going to arise. All sorts of fears are going to arise. And those are the moments of transformation. So it's not a case of trying to come up with some strategy that's going to force some fear of death. I mean, I could say, go and start driving your car off a cliff. That'll probably scare the hell out of you. But it's not really what I'm talking about. You don't want to force that kind of thing. You just want to get real with where you're avoiding things. You know, how do you feel? I mean, you can just ask yourself between you, and this is for everybody on the call. It's just like, how do I, what do I think about this body dying? If I died tomorrow, would I be okay with that? If I found out that I had cancer tomorrow, what would happen? It doesn't take much to just ask yourself some real questions and to be able to get in touch with what I'm talking about.
No.
So, you can do that, but that's about as concrete as I can give you, because it's really got to come from your own interest.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you can ask yourself those questions and you can just feel nothing, because maybe the fear or the denial is too strong. So you have to be interested. You have to be interested in spiritual freedom. And I guarantee, if you're interested in spiritual freedom and transcending egoic, the presumption of the ego, you're going to be faced with fear of death. Because when you start messing with ego transcendence, the thing that is going to die, you're going to experience the fear of death. You're going to experience lots of fear. You don't have to be afraid, but you're going to experience fear.
Mm.
Does everybody know what I'm saying? You see, it's a separate sense of self that dies. And that separate sense of self, if you're identified with that and to you it's real, and then you face the death of that, because when the body drops, the separate sense of self dies, you're going to get in touch with the visceral fear. The fear, if you're attached to the body as being who you are, if you're attached to the separate, to your history of being who you are, of who, just the kind of gross, list that you could make, that this is me. If you're attached to that and you just think about transcending that, then you're going to start experiencing some fear. And usually it's the fear that stops everybody in their tracks. You just look at when you want to do something different, you want to move past your comfort zone. So your comfort zone is basically your separate self. And your separate self basically says, I'm going to exist in this tiny little cage that I put myself in. And then for whatever reason, you get in touch with your heart and you say, no, I don't want to live in this cage anymore. I'm going to start doing something different. And as soon as you start doing something different that's outside of that comfort zone, what usually happens? Fear. Right? Because if you go outside of this comfort zone, then you are going to be transcending ego in that moment. And so it's really the fear, it's the fear of losing that identification with the comfort zone. Because you don't know who you are outside of that comfort zone. So when you don't know who you are outside the comfort zone, it's the same thing as you don't know who you are without a body. You don't know who you are without an identification of knowing who you are. I mean, when you think about death and you really get in touch with it, the biggest fear is the fear of the unknown. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you'll be. But if you really go in and you look at your experience right now, you don't actually know who you are right now. Right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
We think we know where we are. We think we know who we are. We think we know what we're doing. But if you start looking into it, you really don't know very much. But if you really start looking into it, you start to recognize, oh my God, I'm actually not, if I am not this body and mind and the history and all this stuff, I don't actually know who I am. And then you start getting afraid. You see, that's the separate self that's being the illusion of the separate self is being challenged. And then it's like, ooh, I don't know. So it's the fear of the unknown. When you're afraid of dying, it's like, you know, you don't know who you are. You don't know who you're going to be. You don't know where you're going to go. You're going to be very alone. You know, don't we have a fear of being alone, like really alone? Okay, that fear of being really alone is very connected to the fear of death. And it's also coming from the presumption that you're separate. Because if you're not separate, you can never be alone. You are always who you are. You are always that which is eternal. There's nowhere for you to go that you are not that. So you can never be alone. But if you're convinced you're a separate sense of self, the idea of being alone, it can be terrifying. Is this making sense to everybody? I'm connecting kind of the same thing in different ways. So, you know, it's really something to think about, not something just to try to get with the mind. Because when you hit that visceral something, you know, of the fear of being alone, and I saw a couple of people shaking their head, you get in touch with this visceral, like, shit, I don't even know, I don't like that. Too much, don't like that, don't want to face that, let's just distract myself, right? That can be the impulse. But if you stay with that visceral fear that arises, you just like, okay, what is that? And it's very interesting because this is where the practice of recognizing you are that which is aware. Because when you feel a visceral fear of annihilation, and you recognize that you are aware of that visceral fear of annihilation, you see, that's the moment that you can just go, oh, I am not this fear, I am that which is aware. And that gives you enough where you can ride the wave. And when you ride the wave, instead of running away from it and trying to jump out of the, you know, the water, then you get in touch with that which is prior to the fear. That is prior to the identification that wants to jump out of the water. Okay, does anybody else have anything? A question or a comment? Thanks, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia.
Hi, Albert.
Hi, Cynthia. Yeah, so
How's
that
it
was
going? How's it going with your friend? Are you still there?
yeah, so I'm still here. I'll probably go home around Christmas time. So he passed away on October 26th.
Oh, okay.
So, and I wasn't going to plan to say this, but what I witnessed in his dying process, he died of pancreatic cancer, so it went fast, over a year. Yeah, what I saw with him was beautiful, a beautiful love emerging out of him in a way that never existed before. And it made me think of your comment about the song, about, you know, everybody was full of love. And yeah, I think I really related to that, you know, giving up the fear of dying and how love emerges. So even though I wasn't part of that, you know, event that you experienced, I was able to almost witness the same sort of manifestation of love once the surrender to the loss of the physical body in him occurred. I didn't get any of that until this discussion, to be honest with you. So yeah, thank you for creating that analogy, because I could view his death in a different way. But thanks for asking.
But can I ask you something, Albert, just on this? Because did you notice that his surrender was a magnet that pulled you into the same surrender?
Yes, it was part of that whole dynamic, that and other people as well that were close to him. But
well, that's what happened. That's what happened here with 60 people.
yeah, and I think what the surrender, what actually, and I don't know what comes first, or you know, it could be just this dulu, but you know, the love that I saw emerge from him was equally I was drawn into that as well. And I think that was more about not the death of the body, but the actual death of the ego. The love was coming because of the death of the ego. There was no longer any attack. I think that's what I was so was marvelous in a way, and beautiful and divine.
And you're exactly right, because if that love was dependent upon the death of the body, then we only could experience that love with the death of the body. And it's not dependent on the death of the body, it's dependent on the death of the ego.
Yeah.
And it's not even like the ego is something that has to die, because the ego is just a presumption. And when that presumption dies, then that love is released, because that is your natural state. And then it's infectious.
Yes, it certainly was infectious with me, but you know, I've been doing this. I'm not so sure it was with everyone present, but having these distinctions really helps. So yeah,
Yeah.
so
Go ahead.
thank you. Yeah, so you know, about the dying in my own personal case, you know, when we started this, you started the conversation, I immediately said, which I had said on one of the calls earlier in the year, is that I'm not afraid of dying. I mean, I was convinced I wasn't afraid of dying. But then during this conversation, I started to ask myself, well, where, because you used the word spiritual freedom and death, right? Related to death. I said, where then do I not feel free? It's a valid question, or spiritually free, or where do I not feel free? And if I looked at it, I said, I'm the biggest victim of making sure I exercise, I eat well, I do all these, you know, take antioxidants since I was 10 years old when they didn't even exist. You know, that kind of thinking my whole life, you know,
Right.
you know, even though I live in New York, you know, the California spirit. So, and I'm victimized by that. I'm victimized about, you know, drinking the wrong water and all
Right.
this other stuff. So, yeah, so this is complicated stuff, because that's still important to me. Yet I don't feel I'm fearful of dying. But I mean, this is my mind needs to synthesize a lot of this stuff. It's not, oh, well, I'm not even sure it belongs in the mind, like maybe you were telling Paul, because I don't think I could ever reconcile this stuff.
No, because the mind is, you know, the mind is conditioned, and it's really the heart that transcends. You know, it's really that heart attraction to that which is prior to the you know, all of the anxiety maybe around eating the right food, doing the right things. You know, if there's anxiety around that kind of thing, then there's fear.
Yeah, but maybe the fear needs, now that you're saying that, maybe it needs to be, all of that stuff is in and of itself is good, because
Yeah,
you
there's
know,
nothing wrong
we're
with
part of
it.
the ecosystem that makes, no, it's nothing wrong. But not from the standpoint of doing all that, not from the standpoint of you know, being afraid of dying, right? Because we're all going to die, no matter how healthy we may be now. But in terms of how then do you use that healthy state of being into creating that, not only you know, your own self-love, but that love out into the universe, which I witnessed with my friend and his death, you witnessed in the Sangha. You know, maybe that's the,
Yeah, but it's
that,
not a case. But you said it earlier, Albert. It wasn't the death of the body. It was the death of the separate self. He was no longer holding on in the way that he held on before. And I think when you look at your own experience, there's places that you're holding on to an identity, you know, and that identity is the separate self. And so you may not experience it as a fear of death of the body, but if you think about being nobody, you know, you're nobody.
yeah,
you
that's
you
hard.
know, yeah. And then, you know, and you can think about it this way: what if you have nothing, know nothing, and you're nobody?
Mm.
That makes it kind of more real, because what we're talking about is the death of the separate self. And the reason why everyone's terrified of the death of the separate self is because of the attachment to the identity of that separate self as being who they are. And so it's not really about the death of the body.
No, that I get.
Yeah, but I mean, that's an interesting thing to really take in, because we always think it's the death of the body that is the problem, but it's not. It's the death of the separate self. And if you're identified as the body, then you think that's you. But that's really just, again, the death of the separate self. That's what everyone's afraid of. But it's transposed or projected onto the body. And it's the same kind of thing, you know, because when someone dies, like with your friend, for example, the body is gone, but the relationship lives in the heart. And what we think is the relationship is with the other body. Because if I think I'm a body and you're a body and we have a relationship, when your body goes, you know, I feel like there's a loss. But the relationship is not the body. The relationship lives in the heart. And so even if the body goes with somebody that you love, the relationship hasn't gone anywhere. That's why you can feel love, even if you're not physically with the person. Let's say they haven't died, they're just somewhere else. The physical love is still, I mean, the love is still there, but it's not because the body is physically present.
Right. You could feel it on these calls, for example.
Exactly. It's always amazing to me, you know,
Yeah.
how together we can all be, and we're all sitting here looking at a screen. It's amazing, isn't it? So it just shows when we drop any sense of separation, it's like the love just explodes.
Yeah, there's key to this love in dealing with this. There's like this, you know, I'm not yet there intellectually and maybe not even emotionally, but I see that as a key
Yeah,
to the
but you know what,
understanding.
but I think you are there, but this is the thing, because, you know, a lot of times people are afraid of intimacy, because true intimacy is the death of the separate self. Because you can't maintain separation and have true intimacy.
Yeah, well, I'm there 100-fold. So
no, but
know
I
what
just
you're
want to,
saying.
I want to remind you of something. When you came to the New Year's retreat a couple years ago, right? And you had to leave a day early, and you thought you were just going to say goodbye to everybody and walk out the door. Do you remember? And
Yeah,
so
I cried like a
basically,
baby.
yeah, so Albert is there. Everybody was blown open in this retreat. Albert has to leave. And then all of a sudden, he just thinks he's going to leave. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're going to talk, and we're going to break the no hugging rule that usually is a rule in the middle of a meditation. And so all of a sudden, I went up to hug him. And I think you were okay with that. But then all of a sudden, each person in the retreat was lined up to hug him. And he was like, I mean, it was beautiful to see you, because you were hyperventilating almost, because the love that was coming to you was just so intense. You had to step back, take some breath, get ready for the next one, and go in, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like
But you
yesterday.
see, the separate self, you just had to let go of any of your self-consciousness, any of your fear of intimacy, and just like go, okay, bring me another one, I'm ready, you know?
Yeah. Great,
And so,
great example of how to. Yeah.
so anyway, so that was the breaking down. That's a good example of the breaking down of the separate self. And you basically didn't put your attention on being, you know, on that contraction that was arising in any given moment. You were just more interested in being with everybody. So you dropped that contraction, which is the dropping of the separate self in that moment. And so the same thing happened with your friend. You weren't thinking, I'm going to drop the separate sense of self. You were just with him. And then all of a sudden, you know, that love that is you, just as much as him, is enlivened. And it's the same thing that happened with us. You know, and we have a lot of love in our Sangha anyway, but this was completely off the charts. It was like, it was irresistible.
Yeah. Which makes me think that, you know, this can only happen in communion with other people. This doesn't come in isolation.
Yes and no. I mean, I would say never happen, but a collective emergence can only happen with other people. And, you know, I think when you have an individual, if you take, you know, Ramana Maharshi or something, you know, there was this expression of love. It was just like, he just sat there and he would just, he had no real inclination to be with people. He was just completely happy with being immersed in love and bliss, right? He didn't need to be with anyone for that to be whole and complete. But when, you know, when you get a group of people together and something collective starts to happen, it's no longer just the individual, it's amplified through the collective.
Mm.
And that's where it's like, that's really what we're interested in here, because it's one of those things where it's the sum of the parts, you know? It's like, what can emerge between a collective cannot happen with just an individual. It's
Yeah.
like it's like a new being is born that is beyond the individual expression. So you got to get back here, man.
I know, you know, I'm not going to be a victim of COVID, but I know
Hey, well, you're better off here than in the States, so.
for many reasons.
Exactly. Anyway, you know, it's winter time now. I'm actually not doing a New Year's retreat this year. But next, you know, hopefully next year.
Certainly
So
next
make, you
summer.
know, make some plans.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, good. It's nice talking with you. As usual. Nina, are you reaching to unmute? Hi. Hi.
Yeah. I don't have a question. I just want to express how absolutely in love I am with just discovering that from whatever angle we look at things, it's the same. We just have to face the unknown. And it's not anymore, in my experience, I have to. It's like, I really want to. I want to embrace the unknown. I want to embrace this fear of death. And so it's completely beyond like having to overcome the fear of death or something I need to solve or something I need to work on. It's just a joy of throwing myself in that. So yeah.
Well, isn't it a result of sacrificing your separate self to the fire of the heart? And then you're already expressing and living in the way that you said that you wanted to. It's a result.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the magic behind it, right? All you do is give yourself you sacrifice your illusion of the separate self. Like, let's say this pen is your illusion of the separate self, and you just basically throw it in the fire. And
Yep.
you say, here, I don't need this anymore. I'm done writing my own stupid story. I don't need this stupid pen anymore, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens? All of a sudden, you're alive, you're happy, there's love, you're just in love with everything, and you don't know what to do with yourself, but you don't really care.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right. So that's it. And I think that's the thing that everybody, you know, really appreciate what you're saying, because you see, it's not a case of arduously trying to transcend your fear of death. It's the willingness to sacrifice the separate self. And there is, you know, I just want to make this real. So it's not some kind of like, you sit on a webinar for an hour and you hear about the fear of death and you're going to transcend it miraculously, no problem. That could happen. We always leave space for that. But at the same time, you know, you might have to face some fear. I had to face a hell of a lot of fear, and I'm not done. I'm sure more fear will come up, but it doesn't make any difference because you're just infatuated with God realization. You're infatuated with the attraction of the heart to freedom. You know, you're in love with that. And that's all you care about. When you're in love, doesn't the whole world just disappear? But most of the time we're not in, you know, we're just in love with another person, and then that fades because the hormone thing goes down and all of that. But we're talking about, you know, we're talking about being in love with God. Like for real, you know, when you hear these stories about, you know, people who just give up their whole lives when they, you know, when they see God in whatever form, and they're just like, nothing else matters. And I used to really, these stories, I would always be like, oh my God, I want that. you know, and I tell you, I'm tasting that right now in a way that I never have before. And it's absolutely ecstatic. And it's not dependent upon any circumstance at all. So it's that. And then you come together with other people who are just like in love, you know, just infatuated with God realizations, all you want. And then something happens that's completely beyond what anybody else could, you know, what you could actually come up with your mind to have a great time together. It's so not about having a great time together, but it's so far beyond having a great time together. Because there's no together, because you're already one.
Yeah, it's just being real, just living truth, and like you say, not even knowing what to do with it, just being.
Right, because you don't have to know what to do with it. That would be like, who's the I that needs to know how to do anything with love? Why not just love? Why not just be? Because the truth is, you are love, and you are just you just be. There's nothing else to do. You know, and then you are in a body. You're here in this on this planet. You know, so there are things that you do, but you no longer do them in service to the separate self. You no longer do them in the service of fear. You do them in the service of love. And they're just things that you do. They're not fulfilling a purpose so that you know who you are. You're doing something because that's your service. That's what you do. You're just in service because you have a body. You got to do something with it.
That's what I'm experiencing now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Much less or no attachment to things I used to be so attached to, like
Right.
what I do or how I feel or what I say. Or
I mean, aren't you just like, I don't even care how I feel.
yeah.
It's like so draining to sit there and think about how you feel all the time and then be upset because you don't feel how you're supposed to feel. It's
Yeah.
like, what a waste of time. Right?
Mhm.
Anyway, cool. Thanks, Nina. Appreciate it. I'm looking at the time and we're 5 minutes over. I always like to kind of finish on time, but sometimes it feels kind of like we could go through the night. And sometimes we do that here. But anyway, we won't do it tonight because nobody signed up for that when you registered for the webinar. So maybe we'll finish with that. But let's just take a moment just to sit quietly for a second, you know, a minute or two, and then we'll open up the microphones. Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Did any of you have the experience of just being in love with each other right now? I was just sitting here in complete bliss. And I opened my eyes and some of you were sitting there with these smiles on your faces. I also had an idea that just popped into my head. And, you know, one of the things that was a shift in this retreat that we had is because normally when Pete and I lead a retreat, we always we put forward what we're going to do. We have discussion groups. We basically supply everything, and then people listen and then they respond. And this time we basically put out to our Sangha that we weren't going to basically feed them. They were going to have to come. They were going to have to come with their questions and their own interest. They were going to lead the retreat. They had to take responsibility for the retreat. We weren't going to feed them. And that's what we did. And it was a big difference. And so people came prepared. They took their own responsibility for the fact that we were all together. And that was a big part of what happened, that stimulated what happened on this retreat. So what I'd like to do, so we've got next month, the webinar, it's the last webinar of 2020. And a lot of you guys have been on, you're on this webinar every month. So I'd like to challenge you with the same challenge, that I'm going to come on this webinar in December. I'm not going to have a theme. I'm not going to do a talk. I'm going to leave it all up to you, for you to bring, and you help me create the webinar. And I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have, and we can get into dialogues, but it's going to be up to you to bring something, and then I'll respond. Okay? I think it's going to be great. So everybody's got a month. It's too bad we have a month. I'm like, oh, let's do it next week. But okay, so a month. I don't even know what the date is, but the first Wednesday of December. So, you know, I hope everybody comes back with this challenge and you don't just conveniently skip it. So let's do that. Let's see where it goes. Maybe it'd be a whole new beginning for the webinars in 2021 then, who knows? Okay. All right, cool. Okay, should we open the mics and people can.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, Albert.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank
you.
Bye. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
So nice to see everyone again.
I know, it's great to see everybody.
Yeah, it's
Good.
Hey,
Hey, Esteban.
Hello, Esteban.
See ya.
Hi, Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia. Thank you very
Who
much.
is that? Okay, bye. Hi, Margarita. Hey, Tiago. Hey. Christina. I see Christina comes all the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's amazing how alive everything can be on the screen. Just the meditation was amazing.
The Miserella group.
Maybe next webinar too, we won't have a time limit. I should have announced.
Yay.
Okay, Laura said we can put it in the email. Okay, we'll just do something completely different. Everybody show up to find out what happens.
Save 2 days in my agenda.
Okay, good. Good. I don't know if I can go for 2 days, but we'll give it a shot. See, this is it. It's just love, right? It's just the love attraction.
Yeah, I don't want to leave.
I know. And then don't you feel weird just staring at people in the screen? But then it's like, I don't want to leave. It's fantastic.
There's always a women's webinar series.
Oh, so nice to see you again, Nikinta. Remember that?
Yeah, nice to see you, Abram.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, the last time you were in the little box with all the people. No.
And also say,
Oh, yeah, it was here.
Are we done?
Are you in Germany now?
Excellent. What?
Where are you?